Hi everybody, my name is BeniRose. This is a patch that I'm going to explain for Earth Modular Society Explanuary. I recently published a video on it and wanted to get into some of the details of how it worked. It is one of the most complex patches I've done so far by far, and it also is the first I did almost completely in the rack without any external effects or mixing, just a stereo send of these big ambient patches, these big generative ones. And I did have to get oh great, thanks. I did have to get VCV rack involved because I was originally using peaks for 2 LFOs that I sold, and so I had to get VCV rack. I have a CV OCD outputting 2 LFOs, which I'll detail later, but yeah, let's get started on this. Let's turn some of this off to start off with. Let's plug this too. So, this was the beginning of the patch. Started off with a sequence on the SQ1 driving the Beehive, which was a new acquisition, and I wanted to try it out. I was especially excited to try out the rings modes, because that's something I've been missing in my rack for a long time. And I had also gotten this WMD Doppler on their blowout sale. RIP, we miss you, WMD. And so I really like the sound of this thing. It's just, those PT22 something 9 chips. But it sounds really nice, really gritty on the longer delays. And it has stereo via a spread. And so, so this whole patch kind of started with that. The sequence into the Beehive, into the Doppler, with a skewed LFO, a skewed square wave LFO going into that spread on the Doppler. And so, you can't hear right now. Let me turn on this filter up. But when this LFO changes, you'll hear a jump in that delay. There it is. Yeah, so I like that effect a lot, so I started with that. And then the next thing I'll show is this JRU loop. This is a module made by a friend of mine, and it's super cool, kind of inspired by Frippertronics tape looping. Still kind of wrapping my head around a lot of it, but it does a lot of really cool stuff, from tape delays to, sound on sound looping. Here I just took the Beehive into it. Excuse me. I just took the Beehive into it and recorded it at normal speed, and then you can actually slow it down all the way to the point where it goes backwards. And so that's what I did here. I have it kind of like going backwards at half speed. And then that's going in through the FX aid on the ever so popular Shimmer algorithm. And so that's just kind of adding some little backgrounds here and there. Oh, and if you're curious about the filter over here, I have the beehive going through this filter as part of the overall sequencing of the patch, but I'll get into that in a little bit. So we got the main sequence and the reverse. The next thing I'll get into is what is going into this R bar over here. I'll make it fully dry. Turn it up. So there's two outputs on the SQ1. One of them's going into the beehive, and then a second set of the outputs is going over here to my ornament and crime, which you can't see because I'm using a really crappy webcam because I need to get a new camera. But in one hemisphere of the OC, I have a clock skip, and that's getting the gate of the sequence. So whenever a note triggers in the sequence, it goes in the clock skip. It goes into both inputs, and then the first input has a 40% probability of going through, and if it does, then it goes to the other hemisphere, which is on the analog shift register. And so it will trigger that, and the input to the analog shift register is the other CV of the sequence. So the sequence, whenever the sequence triggers, there's a 40% chance it will grab one of the note, that note that's triggering, and shift it on the shift register. And then from there, I have, the first and second indexes of that shift register are going out to the noise reap paradox, another RIP. Losing a lot of good manufacturers these days. But that is just, it's a dual VCO. So, two outputs from the shift register are giving pitch to the two oscillators, which should be tuned together. That mix is going into the pole 0, W&D Steady State Fate collab. Just a really beautiful low pass filter. And that has some light LFO also from VCV Rack on it, kind of opening and closing it. But that output is also going into the R bar. So when it's dry, you just hear that. But then what's also going on with the R bar is the other clock skip in the ornament and crime. There's a 10% chance that when one of these gates fires from the SQ1, it will trigger a capture on the R bar. So that's going to capture, whatever's happening in the paradox and pole 0, those kind of dual voices there, and then, layer that a little bit. I have a slight overdub going on here. So if I make it fully wet, just kind of standard, R bar stuff. Full spray, low intensity, kind of middle length, and then the pitch just, in octaves. So if I put those three things together, think I saw the stream drop out a little bit, so I just want to make sure I didn't miss anything too important. That's okay. I'll keep going. So, in addition to what's going on in the R bar, I have one channel of Pam's Pro over here that is doing a trapezoid waveform at 64 divide by 64. So it's a nice, real slow waveform, 66% width, so that just kind of makes it a little bit faster than normal on the rise and fall. But then it's also a using the Euclidean sequencing, so that it's only doing the trapezoid wave once out of every 4 rounds of 64 steps. So that's kind of like brings it up and then goes down and then it waits a bit. I'm actually using the Euclidean pad, but I could have used just 1 step and or 1 trig and 4 steps. And that is going out into the dry wet on the R bar. So every once in a while it pushes the R bar fully wet so that the chord, I guess kind of chords, the 2 notes on the paradox disappear and we just get the glitchy sounds from the R bar. And that is being malted for something else that I'll get into shortly. And what else do we have? We got bass. Let's hear some bass. I don't want drums, so I'm just going to take that out. There it is. So the bass is the dope for A111116 mini synth voice. Just kind of like bog standard, low filter bass. Of course, it goes out just as I want to talk about it. The gate is open, where the VCA is open. There's no triggering it. It's just kind of playing. But for the sequence, this is something I've been trying to figure out for a while, and I finally got it. I'm using 2 channels on Pam's to sequence this, and one is a divide by 8, which is every 8 quarter notes, obviously. And that is actually they're both divide by 8, right? Yeah, okay. So I have 2 divide by 8 channels here. One is set to random waveform. Let's turn you back down. Going through a quantizer in, I think, minor pentatonic at 20% level. So just an octave of random notes quantized to minor pentatonic. And then the other is a gate, a square shape, but its width is set to 100%. And so the other is a gate, and its width is set to 100%. But it only has a 30% probability. So if it triggers, it's high the entire, 8 quarter notes. But if it doesn't trigger, it's low. And what I did is I used the logic on the quantized pitch channel to, what did I do? I cross opt it with an AND with the channel that is the 100% width. And so what that means is that 30% of the time it's going to be high and a different note will trigger, but for the other 70% of the time it's going to be low, which means the AND logic is going to keep the pitch channel low as well, which leaves the bass on the root note. And so that gives this kind of nice bass line that kind of has notes it can go to once in a while, but the majority of the time it wants to find its way back home to the root note, which is something I really like doing. It's something I often do on my Mother 32 manually when I'll just turn the VCA mode to on or drone mode and press the root note and then maybe press a few other notes and then go back to the root and fiddle with something else and then change up the bass line a little bit. But yeah, so that is what's sequencing the bass here. Feel free to, you got any questions in the chat, feel free to post those up. The other two channels are doing something similar. It's a divide by one, a quarter note quantized random channel. Similarly, I think this one is just in the minor scale. Yeah, natural minor, not pentatonic. And that's going into the volt per octave on the Mother 32. But then I have a divide by 4, right? So every bar, there is a gate which has, a 75% probability of triggering. And that is, let's see if I can just bump that up. Oh, right. This is using a Euclidean. There it is. So that's the Mother 32. This is using a Euclidean sequence with only, one trigger and 12 steps. And it's set to a bar, I think. Is that what I said? So every 12 bars, every 12 bars there's a 75% probability of it triggering those two notes in the Mother 32. And then so that's coming out of the Mother 32 and then going into the Disting Mark IV for a ping pong delay. Let's get everything else back in here because I think I've talked about everything. Right, there's some slight modulation on the filter here, I think, from Crate, and that's also doing some random modulation on the beehive of the timbre and I think the harmonics. Yeah. I love that delay. So the last thing I want to talk about is how I shaped the whole patch. So that's like all the sounds that are going on. But I wanted some things to come in and out. So it was kind of challenging because I actually ran into a bug on the PAMS Pro workout. And so I have a channel here, another trapezoid channel, but its modifier is divide by 101, and it ends up there is or was, I actually haven't checked to see if they updated it, a bug where like divisions greater than 64 cause the rise and fall time to like completely ignore the width. So the trapezoid waveform, the width affects, you know, like that's the trapezoid right there. The width affects, you know, if it like goes up quickly or slowly. And with a high width, it's supposed to go up really fast and come down really slow. But with divide by greater than 64, it just goes slow. So I was kind of fighting this thing for a little bit, but ended up getting it working. And similarly, I have a Euclidean pattern here where it triggers the waveform, the trapezoid, that takes 101 quarter notes to complete, and then it has no triggers for 2 more steps. So it's Euclidean steps of 3 and Euclidean triggers of 1. And so that means there's a period where it's high, and then a period twice as long where it's low, right? With some ramping up and down. And so what I actually did was I took that signal and I ran it through the 3x MIA and I inverted it and offset it so that it would be the opposite. It goes low for 101 quarter notes and then goes high for twice as long. And so that gave me the opportunity to kind of like, you know, bring stuff in that stays for a bit and then take it out for a little bit and then come back. And I actually send this to a lot of places. So I send it to the filter of the baseline of the Dope for Mini Synth. And that's what's closing that down. So that happens every time that the you know, trapezoid changes. But then I'm also sending that out to the sequential switch, the Dope for A151, and it is going both into the input as well as the trigger input. So when it goes high, it triggers through the cycles, and it has 3 steps. As well, but it's also what is being sent to those outputs that are getting cycled through, and yeah, so that works out pretty well because now we can send that you know, movement to a few different places. The first place we're sending it to is the carbon filter, which is what the drums on this quad drum are going to. The drums are just pretty straightforward, triggered from Triggerman. Triggerman is just an 8-channel sequencer with 8 steps. There are 2 channels that kind of move around and randomize, and then 2 that are static, and then they're just kind of like, you know, hi-hatty top samples. But so it goes through the carbon. Oh, yeah. So that's this. Oh, just faded out. Goes through the carbon and then goes into this Pico mix along with the bass line. So, you know, once through the rotation of these 3 steps on the sequential switch, the quad drum, you know, the drums will come in. And then the second one, which is what it's on now, is going to this 2 HP mix, which is upside down. And that is going to this filter that the Beehive is going into that I mentioned at the beginning of the patch. It's a Walrina, but I'm not using the distortion circuit. I'm just using it as a low-pass filter. And so that's what opens up the main voice. But I'm also sending in the other trapezoid channel that's doing the dry, wet, pushing the R bar fully wet every 64. No, that was also Euclidean. So some amount of steps. I don't know. I've lost count at this point. But that's adding to it. It doesn't open. So I'm using the 2HP mix as a CV mixer. The 101 trapezoid is getting mixed fully in to open up the filter all the way, but the 64 trapezoid is only opening the filter a little bit. So when the R bar goes fully wet and the paradox gets, turned off because of that, like a less filtered version, or a more filtered version of the main voice comes in as well. So that just gives a chance for the main voice to come in at different timings than, opposite of the quad drum and the bass. And then the third step in the sequential switch is empty. That's just so that there can be some more space where it's just the bass, and the R bar and the tape. Depending on if the 64 trapezoid is high or not, it could have some, muted version of the main voice, but I think that's it. I think that's everything. I had detailed notes and then managed to ignore most of them, so I apologize if I fumbled through any of that. I'm going to go ahead and let the patch play a bit more. I think I covered everything. So let me bring the patch back in.